Hello and welcome to your mini class on hip mobility. My name is Leanne Kudrowski and I am a certified mobility specialist and strength coach through the functional range conditioning systems. So we are going to be covering hip external rotation today. All you're going to need is a little bit of space on the floor, a yoga mat if you have one, or just floor is great. You are going to want one yoga block, or if you don't have access to a yoga block, a thick book works equally as well. If you also do not have a thick book, no problem. You can still follow along with the class, and there's just one very slight modification for you. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with a little warm up for the hips. We're going to come into this side lying position down here. And you're going to go ahead and clasp your hands just like this. If you would like to have your yoga block underneath your head for comfort, for a little pillow, by all means, please do. So we're going to take our hip through a controlled articular rotation. All this means is we're taking it through a very large circle, which is going to warm up our entire hip capsule before we get into the mobility portion. So you're going to start by pulling your knee towards your shoulder. You're going to open up wide through that hip. So we get this nice little squeeze right here on the side of the hip. And then you're going to keep coming, pulling your knee back behind your hip. So I'm bringing my foot close to the wall behind me here. So I get a nice squeeze in the glute and then let it keep coming through. So that is one circle, which is half of our first rep. We need to go the other way. So you're going to go ahead and pull that knee back behind you. Get a nice little squeeze in the glute there. Open up wide through the hip and then pull that knee back towards your shoulder. Let's do the same thing again. This time you're going to focus on pushing your bottom knee down into the ground. This is going to help create a little extra stability and just make sure you're not shifting and moving your entire body around. So here we go. Pull the knee towards your shoulder while pushing the bottom knee down into the ground. Continue your circle by opening up through that hip. Pull the knee as far back behind you as you can. Give that glute a nice squeeze there. And circling back through to your start position. And then let's go the other way. Pull the knee behind you, squeeze your glute, open up wide through the hip, pull the knee back towards your shoulder and down. Let's go one more time here. Pull your knee towards your shoulder, open up wide through the hip, pull the knee as far back behind you as you can, giving your glute a little squeeze, and through. Back the other way last time. Pull the knee behind you. Open up wide. Knee towards shoulder and down. Okay. Let's go ahead and flip to your opposite side. Warm up the other hip here. So we're clasping our hands. And now this actually helps us create more stability too. One thing that often happens in these hip cars is we'll kind of roll backwards with our body instead of keeping it in the hip, which is the goal. So by clasping your hands like this and pushing that bottom arm down into the ground and pushing that bottom knee down into the ground, it's going to help keep your torso very, very stable. And this means we're going to keep more of the movement just into the hip instead of into the spine or the chest torso area. And that's going to help you get so much more value out of this movement. Ready? So we're driving everything into the ground, your arms and your bottom knee. Pull knee towards shoulder. Open up wide through the hip. Pull the knee as far back behind as you can, squeezing that glute, and back to your start position. And reverse it. Pull it back. Open up wide through the hip. Pull knee towards shoulder and down. Great. Let's do another rep. Ready? Pull knee towards shoulder. Open up wide. Pull knee as far back behind you as you can, squeezing your glute. Back to your start position. And reverse. Pull knee back behind you. Open up wide. Pull knee towards shoulder and down. Let's go one more here. Knee towards shoulder. Open up wide. Pull knee as far back behind you as you can. Back to your start position. Last one, back the other way. Pull knee behind you. Squeeze that glute. Lifting up wide. Rotating, pulling that knee towards your shoulder and down. Okay. Now that our hips are warmed up, we're going to expand the range of our hip external rotation. So here's how we're going to do that. We're going to come into what is a 90-90 position. How do you know you're in 90-90? Your knee is lined up with the center of your chest, and the heel is lined up with your knee. So you got this 90-degree angle right here, and then we have a 90-degree angle right there, 90-90. So our front leg here is already biased into external rotation, which is what we're going to work with. For a lot of us, we're going to feel an even better stretch if we take this yoga block and place it underneath your front hip, just like this. If you don't have a yoga block or a thick book, you can do all the same steps minus this one. You're still going to get a lot out of it, but many of us with the hip elevated on a yoga block, just like this, it actually means we're going to get a much deeper stretch into our hip capsule with this hip being above the knee, just like that. Okay, so now that we're in position here, if your knee is floating, I want you to shift as far forward as you need to get that knee firm on the ground. I want this knee supported. Even if that means you're shifting so far forward that you're almost coming off the yoga block, that's okay. Just make sure that knee is supported. Now we're going to place our hands on the ground just like this, and you're going to find a really nice stretch into your outer front hip by sending the chest forward to get this really great stretch into the glute and into that lateral hip. Now here's a check that I want you to have to get the most out of it. At no point in this class are we going to lean down towards our leg like this. So if you're leaning down, you're just going to go ahead and pick yourself right back up. You might even feel a really good stretch down there, but that's actually using the spine in order to try to find the stretch in the hip. Now, if we want to get the stretch way deeper into the hip, instead of using the spine, here's what you're going to do. Imagine there's an object just out in front of you here that you can't quite reach it, and you're trying to touch it with your nose. Try to reach forward and touch that object with your nose. For most of us, you're going to be like, oh, that gave me a really nice stretch into this outer hip, even more so than if you're leaning down. Think about your spine being as long as you possibly can, and that nose just reaching forward for this object. And that's how you're going to get a really great stretch. If you've already found your stretch there, amazing. Keep sitting in it for a moment here. If you're like, hey, I'm still struggling, I haven't found my stretch yet, the next thing you can do is think about creating an anterior tilt to your pelvis. What does that mean? If this is my pelvis in neutral, this is how I get an anterior tilt. I create an arch in the low back just like that. So in that 90-90 position, doing that movement will actually help you get a much better stretch. So here we are in our 90-90. Chest being sent forward, nose trying to touch an imaginary object. Now, think about sending your tailbone to the sky. It's going to be a tiny, tiny movement in this position, but imagine you're trying to arch your low back, send your tailbone to the sky. And then we're going to find an even better stretch from there. Okay? Take 2 breaths. Next, we're going to activate everything that's being stretched. How do we do that? Imagine there's a bug underneath your knee and you want to squish it. So go ahead and start driving your knee down into the ground. You're trying to squish an imaginary bug, and you can press really hard here. Like, give it a good push. We're dealing with big muscles here. Press as hard as you feasibly can for another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Rest. And now we're just going to be in the stretch. You may find that you get a tiny bit deeper into your stretch after that contraction. So imagine you're sending that nose forward again. You're sending that tailbone to the sky. And let's just take a couple breaths. And then we're going to do it one more time. Ready? Go for it. Start driving the knee down into the ground, trying to squish your imaginary bug. Everything that was just being stretched is now being strengthened. On this second round, I want you to try to push harder than you did on the first time around. Can you press as hard as you possibly can for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax. And again, just being in the stretch. And again, we may have found we got slightly deeper after that contraction. Sending that nose forward a little bit more. Take a breath. And we'll slowly come out of that. Sit yourself back up. You can move that hip around a little bit in any way that feels good to you for a moment before we switch and do the same thing on the other side. So on the opposite side, we're coming back into our 90-90 position. So doing our double check that we have our knee lined up with the center of the chest, heel lined up with the knee to create that 90 degrees. We're going to take our yoga block, prop it underneath the front hip. If your knee's on the ground, stay there. If your knee is up, you're just going to bring yourself forward and shift yourself off the block as much as you need to until that knee is fully supported on the ground. You're going to place your hands on the ground just in front of you. And now the goal is to find the stretch in the hip without using your spine. So again, we're not going to lean down towards that leg at all. Instead, you're going to keep your chest really high, spine really tall. You're going to imagine that there's an object just out in front of you, and you're trying to touch it with your nose, but it's just out of reach. But you're like, can I get there? Can I try to touch that object? And then you're going to arch the low back and send the tailbone to the sky. And this is where you're going to really get the best stretch into your hip. Now we're just going to take some deep breaths here. We've already been in the stretch for 1 full minute. We spent 2 minutes on the other side. The reason for this is there's a stretch reflex in the body that research has shown really starts to relax after the 2-minute mark. So stretching for 30 seconds is way better than nothing, but you're going to get so much farther, so much faster by sitting in your stretch for 2 whole minutes and then doing our activation technique. Our activation technique brings blood flow and nutrients into the tissue that we're stretching. It says, hey body, this tissue is important. lay down more healthy tissue in this spot. And that is why it is so effective for making your hips feel better, because you're bringing the blood flow and the nutrients into that spot, laying down more healthy tissue there, giving your body the information it needs to pay attention to the areas that are feeling a little bit tighter or a little bit weaker. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Go ahead and start pushing your knee down into the ground, activating everything that is being stretched. So there's an imaginary bug underneath your knee, and you are trying to squish that bug. Go ahead and keep driving quite hard here for another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax. And now you can see, can you get ever so slightly deeper into the stretch? Millimeters counts. Millimeters adds up a lot over weeks and months of practicing. Stretching that nose to your imaginary object out in front of you. And then we're going to do it one more time. Ready? Start driving your knee down into the ground, squishing that imaginary bug. On this second round, we're going to try to press harder than we did on the first time around. You're going to be like, can I work just 5% harder? Can I press just 5% harder again? For 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax the contraction and just see, can you get ever so slightly deeper into the stretch? We send that chest a little more forward. Take a couple breaths. And we'll slowly come out of that. Go ahead and move your yoga block off to the side. We are going to stay in our 90-90 here. And now what we're going to do is a little bit of strengthening. We've all had that experience where you are tight, so you stretch, and you're like, hey, I feel a little bit better. And then you wake up the next day, and you're like, man, I feel exactly like I did before I stretched. If we do some strengthening directly after doing the stretching and expanding of the range, you're actually more likely to be able to keep the range that you just created. So instead of constantly going 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, you get to go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and make way better progress over time. On top of that, what is the tightest is often the weakest. So if you want really like supple, buttery, good feeling hips, you also need to make them really strong on top of the stretching. We need both. So here's how we're going to do that. We're in our 90-90, and I'm going to work with my trail leg here. So the first one that I stretched. I'm going to keep my chest facing completely forward like this. At no point am I going to twist. Now I'm going to hinge the back legs. I'm going to pick the back knee up off the ground. Now we get this great squeeze and strengthen in the side of the hip right here. And slowly set it back down. Double check that your chest is staying forward, because if you start to twist with the torso, you're going to get a lot more range, but it's going to feel very different. It's not going to be as isolated into the hip there. So chest forward, knee off the ground, squeeze, 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 set it back down. Up, squeeze, 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 double check. Maybe can I pull my knee higher? Question it. Could I work a little harder there? Bring it back down. Here's rep 4. We're going to go for 8. So 4 more. Every single rep, you're questioning, could I get a little higher here? Could I fight for a little more range? Whether you get it or don't, it's okay. But the act of fighting to try to get that knee higher, that's what's really going to get you stronger. And eventually the knee is going to get higher because of that. Here's reps 7. And last one, up. And this one you're going to hold 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Set it down. Beautiful. Let's switch to the other side here. Okay, same thing here on this side now. My knee is lined up with the center of my hip here. Torso facing forward, chest facing forward. Ready, and lift, squeeze, down. Lift, squeeze, down. Lift, squeeze, down. Lift. Can I fight for more range? Can I get higher? Down. Rep 5. Keep fighting for that height. Down. 6. Down. Last 2 reps here. 7. Down. Up and hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And down. All right. I know my hips feel a little bit better just after that. I hope yours do as well. If you feel better just after that short class, and if you learned anything in that short little free class, imagine how much you are going to love 6 full weeks of coaching, new classes, a guidance, and ability to ask questions from me. If you loved this class, you are going to love the beginner hip mobility program, 6 weeks of classes and coaching, plus lifetime access to all of the classes. So you get to do them over and over and over again so that you are going to feel so good. The link to the program is below. So go ahead and click into that link. If you have any questions, you can find me on Instagram at Leanne Elizabeth K. I will also link that below. Please go ahead, drop into my DMs, ask me any questions that you have. I am always happy to chat with you guys and hear how these classes are going for you.